Hello everyone, I'm Catherine Halfley, and today I'm going to be doing a case study analysis of the case study Quran Burning, Cultural Sensitivity Leads to Deaths and Multiple Apologies. So as we get started, this case study takes place in Afghanistan, so we need to learn a little bit about that area. Afghanistan is a remote, mostly tribal and conservative nation. It is also deeply religious. The nation's intensely independent citizens are known for being willing to fight for their freedom, and the Soviet Union tried to subdue the country during a 10-year war that ended in 1989, but they were unsuccessful, and this was followed by a civil war in Afghanistan and then the US-led invasion that began in 2001. So let's talk about the war in Afghanistan. United States involvement in Afghanistan began in October of 2001, 1 month after the attacks of 9/11. It was called Operation Enduring Freedom and was launched by the U.S. with the help of the United Kingdom, Australia, and the Afghan United Front. The goals of the operation included defeating and dismantling Al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban from power, as they were allowing Al-Qaeda to continue to operate. They also sought to bring justice to Osama bin Laden, and they achieved this after 10 years when he was killed in 2011. And by 2012, the Afghan war had resulted in the deaths of more than 3,000 coalition troops, with nearly 2,000 of them being American military. It was very clear that the U.S.-led NATO effort in Afghanistan would need the support of the country's tribal leaders, government, and people to effectively battle Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And so because of this, most of the cultural training for soldiers being deployed to Afghanistan and other countries involved three groups. And these groups were the U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, the Army's Training and Doctrine Commands, or TRADOC for short, Center for Army Lessons Learned, and the U.S. Forces Command, or FORCECOM. And so we're going to break down what each of these does really quickly. And so CENTCOM oversees all branches of the military in a theater level operation. It identifies and requests training needs for active and deployed troops. TRADOC's Culture Center develops and provides the educational resources needed for troop training. And FORCECOM also provides more troop training tailored to the ever-evolving needs in conflict zones, and its readiness training includes specific scenarios with complex cross-cultural challenges. And so the U.S. Army recognized that they had to build trust with local Afghans to be successful, but this required respect for the culture and some basic communication abilities. And so for the first time in the fall of 2010, the Army required all soldiers and reservists deploying to Afghanistan and other regions to complete a 6 to 8 hour online language and culture program, and they also required each platoon to have a language-enabled soldier who had taken a more extensive language program. It's also important that we talk a little bit about Afghans and the Quran and why this is such a big deal. So Afghanistan is an Islamic republic with more than 99% of its citizens being followers of Islam or Muslims, and the Quran is their holy book, and its handling requires respect from all, even from non-believers. So there have been a few different Quran desecration incidents. On September 11th, 2010, Terry Jones, the pastor of a church in Florida, threatened to burn a Quran. He initially retracted his plans after religious leaders and government officials asked him to stop. But on March 20th, 2011, he burned a Quran in his church, and the event was streamed online, and a later recording circulated with Arabic subtitles. And so this incident sparked outrage in Afghanistan, and deadly riots broke out. At least 21 people were killed, including 7 United Nations employees, and more than 150 were injured. This wasn't the first event, though. Of an earlier event happened in 2005 at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the U.S. military base there. And that's where a lot of suspected terrorists from the Afghan war are being held. And reports state that U.S. military personnel flushed a Quran down the toilet. So now we're going to talk about the Quran burning in Afghanistan, which is what this case study is about. So on February 20th, 2012, several printed items were delivered to the coalition's Bagram Air Base, incinerator from a nearby detention center, and news reports stated that several hundred Islamic prints from the detention center's library, including copies of the Quran and other Islamic religious writings, had extremist messages written in them or had extremist content that was deemed inappropriate for the detainees at the detention center. Afghan workers pulled charred copies of the Quran out of the fire when they realized what was in the burn pit, and once the coalition troops realized what had happened, they halted the operation. And although none of the material was destroyed, the act of mixing holy books with garbage and then burning them was beyond comprehension for Muslims. And according to some reports, the Afghan workers took the charred copies off base and showed other Afghans what happened. Within days of this incident, deadly protests broke out in Afghanistan, resulting in the deaths of 30 Afghans and the shooting deaths of 4 American soldiers, which many believed were connected to the incident. A grenade explosion during one protest injured 6 other American service members. And a quote from Davoud Mouradian, who was a former advisor to the Afghan president, says, "They have been here for more than 10 years and they still fail to understand the sensitivities of Afghanistan. For Afghans, burning the Quran is an unacceptable, unforgivable incompetence." And many criticized the NATO soldiers for not taking the time to know the Afghans and their values, because if they had, incidents like this probably wouldn't have happened. So now we're going to talk about the NATO and U.S. response. And as I go through this, I'm going to mention a lot of press releases that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about, because there were a lot of press releases and there were a lot of updates. And we just don't have time to talk about all of them. So the first responses came hours after the incident on February 21st, 2012, from General John R. Allen, commander of the International Security Assistance Force, or ISAF. And a quote from that release says, "We are thoroughly investigating the incident and we are taking steps to ensure this does not ever happen again. I assure you, I promise you, this was not intentional in any way." A news release from U.S. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta was also issued on February 21st, 2012. ISAF also issued a news release for the first of 3 investigations. In this release was the requirements for new training. Deputy Defense Secretary Ashton Carter arrived in Afghanistan on the 2nd day after the incident and offered his apologies for the Quran burning. 2 days following the incident, a joint ISAF and Afghan investigation was launched, and they went to the detention center to investigate what led to the Quran burning incident. The U.S. Department of Defense conducted a press briefing with ISAF spokesperson Brigadier General Karsten Jacobson on February 22, 2012. The Department of Defense American Forces Press Service issued a news release on February 22, 2012. This release repeated apologies from officials, mentioned the protests that were happening, and explained the joint investigation that was going on, and they also explained the required cultural training for military personnel. The next day, the ISAF issued a follow-up news release due to the Afghan public's interest in the investigation and asked them for patience as the investigation continued. And then on February 23, 2012, President Barack Obama issued an apology in a hand-delivered letter by U.S. Ambassador Ryan Crocker to Afghan President Hamid Karzai. And the entire letter was not released due to some of the content of it, but he did release the apology on the Afghan president's website. And this is a quote from it, and it says, "I wish to express my deepest regret for the reported incident. I extend to you and the Afghan people my sincere apologies. The error was inadvertent. I assure you that we will take appropriate steps to avoid any recurrence, to include holding those accountable or those responsible." And so now we're going to move on to the aftermath and what the investigations found. So in March 2012, a NATO investigation found 6 U.S. soldiers responsible for the Quran burning incident. They found that their actions were not deliberate with malicious intent to defame the faith of Islam. And then in August of 2012, the Pentagon released its report on the investigation, stating that it found while soldiers generally knew the Quran was a holy text, they were ignorant of the extreme cultural offense their mishandling of it could cause. Investigators concluded that the soldiers' cultural and language training was not sufficient. U.S. troops ignored Afghan soldiers and prison guards at the detention center who objected to the plans to destroy the library material, and most of the library material which included 474 Qurans and 1,100 religious tracts, was not extremist in nature. According to the Washington Post, it was Afghan workers who immediately stopped the incinerator once they realized what type of material was being burned. They then called other Afghan workers to help rescue the material. The soldiers received unspecified administrative punishment, but they did not face criminal charges. And so FORSCON pre-deployment training for soldiers got some updates because of this incident. It now includes the following reminder regarding the disposal of Islamic religious materials. It says, the proper disposal of Islamic religious materials should not be performed by U.S. personnel. Only usable, damaged, worn-out Quran should be disposed of, and with proper procedures. Only Muslims should dispose of Qurans and or other Islamic religious materials, and methods include wrapping the Quran in a pure cloth and burying it in a grave, or fastening the Quran with a heavy object like a stone and placing it respectfully in flowing water. So in conclusion, there's a lot done right in this case study, but there's also some done wrong. They should have been more proactive and aware in their training. Obviously, you can't predict everything that's going to go wrong, but as professionals, we have to understand that there is a lot that can go wrong and prepare for those situations. But their honesty and the continuous flow of information that came after the incident, whether it was updates or press releases or briefings, was really helpful, and it was really also helpful in rebuilding relationships that may have been damaged because of this. So overall, I believe that they did a great job in the aftermath of the incident in being professional. Thank you.